He said, my name is Ryan Dickie, so I work at one of the detention forest professionals. Everybody's interested in the project. You fill an application form and started probably at see it more. Actually, just a really brief history. Also, actually a Tennessee in Bridgewater, but I graduated through there in 2008 or 9, so I'm getting up on 15 years in the woods. From there, worked actually for Mark Chisholm for a few years. Mark, the director of the lot owners and operators. So I was local capture planning through based on stuff, and after a couple of years, a bit of experience, struck out on my own, and I worked for a number of years as a contractor, mostly for small private, and a little bit for Elmdale and Taylor. So mostly doing simple work. Also former on both lot owners, operators, and auto bonds. So it's involved with the organization. I'm just going to give just a presentation, basically just a kind of a brief overview of exactly what the project is. Touch on a lot of the things up actually from Andy's video, and then talk about maybe a little bit more in depth some of the requirements that actually be involved in one of them.
Well, Mark Chisholm, who you just heard talked about there, had a really amazing experience. He went to the first graduate school presentation. My wife happened to be in the class, and he got up there with his presentation, and the first slide came up, and he pressed that button if you're trying to get to work, and the last slide came up and said, "Thank you, any questions?" And he said, without batting an eyelash, "Well, in conclusion, does anybody have any questions?" He never did get it to work, so hopeful, but knows with technology. One thing I learned from that is you always print your slides off and have them up top with you.
Does it work now? Of course not. All right. Let me know when you want to change.
There we go. Nice. So this is just an outline of what the presentation would be. So just a brief history of the project, rationale behind it, who's involved with the network, and then the last couple slides, like I said, would be eligibility requirements, and then also how you can reach out and express your interest in participating. So the project. So over the next 4-year, 5-year project, like Andy said, we've kind of already burned our first year here, most everything set up. Research design exactly what type of stand. But over the next 4 years, we're going to conduct a large scale project on ecological forestry. Our numbers seem to float 150, 160. It could be more or less. It really depends on how big the job site there and everything, but definitely 150. So in late September 2021, the Forest Innovation Trust, we always call it FIT, and everyone knows the history of that. So FIT was created after before the Republic closed down. The government created a $50 million transition trust, and like Andy talked about, our entire group of partners got together and put in an application for a $10 million project, which still stands as I think the biggest project. It probably will be the biggest project that they fund through the trust. Like I say, we're going to carry out hopefully probably starting late summer. We'll get a few harvests start to trickle in, and by maybe the winter or definitely next year we'll really get harvest. The pilot is going to quantify economic and environmental costs and the benefits of forestry based on natural conservancy. So And like the last point says there, the project's going to work only with willing landowners who volunteer to participate. So, and with that, I want to highlight that it is a research project already mentioned here today. So we're fairly rigid on what we can work with in terms of vegetation types, soil types, ecosite, sizes and everything else. So I've already looked at a few places. They probably fit for veg types, but in really small pockets and not great for a research project. It's like something for everybody, but get good data on the project to make sure it can inform decisions. Well, the rationale, so the techniques in ecological forestry have been the focus of numerous research studies over more than 30 years. There's no large-scale pilot in Nova Scotia that looks at the cost and benefits of ecologically sensitive management of forestry. And one thing to highlight there too is that there is a lot of research that goes on around ecological forestry, especially now in Nova Scotia, but really it's very groundland centered, which is still a little bit of a different theme. A lot of the folks have heard of the SGen Silviculture Guide for the Ecological Matrix, which is I think a really good document. There's a lot of good new aggressive treatments in there, but they tend to be still a little bit more towards the industrial side. Maybe there's a few elements of what goes on in those that aren't the best fit for private lands to carry out our project based off the SGen, but we're going to make some tweaks and really look at the cost of doing this work on private lands. So this is just our partners in the project. It actually says 10 organizations there, but it's 11. So we've got the Nova Scotia Working Woodlands Trust, Federation of Nova Scotia Woodlot Owners, Western Woodlot Services Cooperative, NSCC, Federation of Mainland Mi'kmaq, Nova Scotia Landowners Forest Fibers Producers Association, Nova Co-op, Community Forest International, Apple Co-op, and Virgin Columbia Ag Research. One thing I wanted to highlight with this slide too is if you happen to be a member of any of those groups, especially with the co-ops and you're really interested in the project, definitely fill out an application form, but get in touch with whoever your forest tech or representative is. If you happen to be a member of one of them and call me or email me or anything, I'll probably direct you back to them anyway. Because they'll be the ones helping to plan and oversee all the harvests on member sites for them. But for the research, ecological forestry aims to promote the restoration of standards of climax forest types appropriate for each parcel of vegetation soil types. So there's a little quote here. It's from just a short report from Taylor and D'Amato, which says, we intend to treat forests in ways that bring them closer in structure, function, and composition to healthy natural forests at all stages of successful development. So the goal is to build diversity and resilience, ensure ecological integrity, mitigate the impacts of climate change. And climate change is a big thing that we're really just starting to wrap our heads around a little bit in the woods. But one of the big Community Forest International is one of the partners in the project. One of the big things that they'll be doing is when we do our field assessment in the field, we take a bunch of measurements for them, and they're actually going to be able to measure, calculate carbon stored in your stand. And we'll also be looking at soil carbon sampling process too. But part of that will go to inform our treatments. Having them based around, restoring biodiversity and everything, but also figuring out what we can do to store the most carbon on those sites, and also how they're probably going to transition as things warm up. There's a lot of uncertainty around, is a black spruce stand always going to be a black spruce stand? Now we don't really know it, and so we want to try and figure out some ways in which we can plan for the worst case scenario and hope for the best. So we're focusing mainly on applying a mix of irregular gap and continuous cover shelter wood treatments on the sites, although change a little bit here and there. It's really going to be directed by the site, but collect a lot of data pre and post harvest on timber, biodiversity, carbon, and soil nutrients. when we do a PTA, one of the big things we always look at, and you may have heard it talked some in the news, but we look at acceptable and unacceptable growing stock, and that's basically the breakdown on that normally through a PTA system is acceptable as anything that's a healthy tree of desirable species and it has the potential to grow or has a sawlog unit already, something they develop. Unacceptable would basically encompass everything else. So, just poorly formed, never going to make a sawlog or anything. It doesn't always fit, like especially when biodiversity is as big or maybe even a bigger concern than the economics of the stand. Those definitions are really rigid and they don't necessarily fit with our goals for the site. So we've actually created a new category, and that's called ecological growing stock. And that's just a category to encompass everything. A lot of sites we've looked at, or maybe sites that were burnt or previously harvested, came back to, just think of one in particular, came back mostly to large tooth aspen, not a particularly valuable species, and not a long-lived one, and really not what you would expect to see there in an older forest, more appropriate for that site. And but the site does have some yellow birch, and they're all very poorly formed. They're never going to make a sawlog or anything, but super high ecological value. They're few of them are really big, have some holes for cavities and stuff, but also really important for seed trees. So call that unacceptable growing stock is a little bit. It's really not the right term for me. Those are perfect for the site. But I don't care that it's not going to make a solid when that there just as retention for help transition that site back probably should be. And then other trees would fit in that, any mass producers, red oak, anything like that, any large snags, wolf trees, just you think white pine with multiple tops, everything. And those are very definitely don't want too many of them, but they're very important. I have a research study I was reading the other day. It says, especially birds and stuff, there's 60 to 95% likely to nest in wolf tree. Big, nice, perfect great tree with a sawlog. So maybe not get an entire stand of them. We might want to try and get rid of some, but definitely retain biodiversity and birds. And then also non-commercial species across anything that maybe doesn't make sawlog, doesn't make anything saleable, but it's just something that biodiversity is generally something's going to use it. Okay, so on to the next one. So how do we actually pick our veg types? So there's 4 criteria that we came up with using the selection process. So does the veg type have wide distribution or regional importance? That could be things, old field white spruce sites, generally fairly ubiquitous across the province. And you can also take old field white pine, really not very much of it in central. I don't think there's really any in the east, but super important site in the west, really common down there. So those. Does it have ecological management challenges? White spruce sites fall in that too, but also we're going to take a look at hemlock dominated stands. Hemlock is a species that should do good under a changing climate, but we've got hemlock woolly does coming through, so we don't, there's going to be challenges there. But maybe in the past, there's been great sites. I think they're going to do well even under climate, but now it's really knows what's going to happen there. But we're going to come up with some strategies to get out ahead of it. Does the veg type have significant climate change adaptation considerations? Same thing, white spruce, black spruce, balsam fir stands. They're already, especially in the balsam fir, you can already see it. They just don't. Even in my 15 years, I don't think a decade less. And then does the veg type have restoration opportunities? So that's like you say, sites that have been converted to maybe an early successful site through either disturbance or harvest. And then you can see the table on the right there. So that's data that we got from the folks at, with DNR and inventory data from their permanent sample plots. So when they do their permanent sample plots, they actually take the veg type and everything. So they're generous not to share us the data, and it shows. You can see on the second column there, percent total. So that just speaks to what percentage of all their ESP plots that veg type encompass. We look, because like I say, we don't want to pick we don't want to pick one that's really not well represented. We got to be really out there hunting for the sites. And it's not really a great site too, but study because it's not a common one, probably whatever anyway. So we use that, and then there's also haven't released the effort. They have a predictive vegetation type GIS, like a mapping layer that they've used, and so we've got all the data. So we really relied on that data, but inform our decisions. So this is basically what we came up with, is our group of vegetation types. I'll quickly go through them. One thing I want to highlight is that we've actually got, never actually counted, I think it's over 20 veg types. We have a lot of them are different veg types, but they're very similar. They end up as the same ecosite. So we've been able to group them together. So group one is, your mixed with sites, so red spruce, red maple, or white spruce, red maple. It's going to behave generally the same. Now, I won't go through each one of these. If anyone's interested in seeing the table or anything, I've got business cards and thing there, and you can take my email and contact me, figure out all this stuff. One of the big things I wanted to highlight though from this is those are the veg types, but if you look in the third table there's also the FEC ecosite. The big thing to remember with that is that your ecosite comes from your veg types and your soil types. So might run into scenarios, and I've already assessed one with thought that already had this, where you've got the right veg type, but your soil type is something different. So maybe a lot poorer, or it could be a lot richer, and you know, notice the same ecosite, and it makes it really not eligible, probably not eligible for the project, just because it would be, you know, most of the soil types that we work in these stands are, you know, kind of a little bit poor nutrient soil types, and then we happen to have one on a really rich type, it's going to be a different harvest, and if we only have, it becomes kind of a statistical anomaly there. So even just to point out that even if you think you've got the right veg type, there's still some looking to do and figure out get everything. So then these are just I just stole these directly from the SGEM documents. This just talks about the types of harvests that we're most likely going to do. So this would be a high retention gap or regular shelter food. So basically like a patch cut, kind of just randomly through your woodlot. Generally these patches would be between 0.1, 0.2 hectares. It kind of depends on what species you're trying to regenerate there. And they're just evenly distributed through the lot. If you can see, the colors don't stand out that great, but on the right hand side, you can see kind of how they break it up. So those are in C1, C2, and C3. So there's referring to cohorts. So the C1s would be like your first harvest through the stand. You're going to take 30-35% of those, and within the patches, we always have retention for what we call permanent reserve trees, so legacy trees. Probably big nice specimens of the species that you want that you're going to keep. Like we're never going to harvest those. They're actually marked and retained for every harvest, and then also some growing stocks. So we happen to have some nice younger tree patch. So those are maintained, and then every time in probably roughly a 15-year interval, you're going to go back and expand those gaps or create new ones. And over 50-ish years, you're going to have runs or harvest on that site, and for the next 50 years, really you're doing stand tending. So that's when you're thinning and maybe a little thinning. So this is the gap regular shelter wood. Generally, we'll probably lean a little bit more towards this one. They're even more operationally, they're really easy to do because you're just planting space and little mini clear cuts that are retention. They're really good ones for the guys in the harvester, and operationally easier to go back to after. Imagine when you get nice regen coming up in those gaps, you can put a guy with a spacing side and just say, thin this gap instead of having to work with better. The next slide. So this is a high retention continuous cover regular shelter. Basically, this is kind of like doing a single tree selection, but it's a little bit less organized. You're not necessarily treating the entire stand, so you're just going to kind of run your trails down through, but not sticking to necessarily like a rigid trail spacing or anything. You might get your trails close together, then they might go wide apart, and you'll have little patches of untreated portions to stand to. These ones are a little bit better suited to hardwood sites or maybe a pine site where you've got trees that are a little bit more naturally wind firm, and it's something that through talking with the guys at DNR that they found even after Hurricane Fiona, they've got some they had some demonstration sites where they had regular gap shelter wood and then continuous cover side by side on the same lot, and the gaps they just stood up a lot better. But the continuous cover work did. The photo on the right is actually from a private lot that I've been managing for Damo River for. I've been working with it for 10 years now, so it's a site that really wasn't a continuous cover. It essentially did the same thing. It's one that the landowner had always been, just picked through and taken a little bit of firewood, a few saw logs and stuff like that there, and so we had a little bit of regeneration started over 10 or 15 years, always picking at it. And then we actually went through the harvester, did another harvest a few years ago, and you can see all the beautiful regen, nice red spruce, just a hemlock pine, everything else coming up under what's really an overstory, mostly red maples. There was used to be a lot of fir standing. You can kind of pick that out, but just to show you that's kind of the goal. And then one note I hit on my slides here is that just highlight that one's had 2 passes through it. It's basically at the point that we're really not going to do anything there for a long time. So that understory comes up that it gets parsed. So I saw all the rest of the trees understand become either permanent preserves or they'll be biodiversity trees, and some of them actually did blow down in the hurricane, but it becomes not worth it after a while to go in and get anything else over there. You're going to destroy so much hard to create. So we're just going to leave it there. They improve our soils. You can see it. So this is actually the same site, just in a little bit better spruce spot. And you can see there's we left that one a little bit tighter. There's lots of nice regen started on there under the ground, and there's some nice spruce logs on the ground there that actually came in Hurricane Dorian. But again, it's just for a couple cords of logs, it's not. You can go back down through there. But so other requirements for consideration. We do have a minimum size. Our working size right now is 5 hectares. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a contiguous, like one solid 5 hectare block. It can be broken up into a few small blocks, but each small one needs to be at least a hectare, just to fit our research plots. And it has to be, fairly uniform. We can take. There might be some inclusions of a little bit of a different bed type here and there, but overall, we need to be as uniform as possible. It's not always easy to find a perfect site, but it needs to be close. Another big consideration for a lot of private landowners, we can't use any of our funds to build roads for anyone. So if you have a site on your lot that you want to work with, but we're going to need road for you, you'll have to, whether through if maybe you pay for it yourself. Use at least some of the stuff to offset it, or money, but we can't be responsible. But money to go to the actual research project. One of the things we are talking about though is when we pay for when the harvester and the forwarder come in on site, we're actually going to pay them hourly just to make sure that they don't have any of the crunch needed to produce. To pay the bills, or to pay them so they can slow down and do the exact job. One of the other things that we're going to do with that is, if say you only needed 200 meters of just a little spur road or something like that, we'll probably pay for the forwarder to just haul it dead, more expensive, but it saves on road costs. And then for the long-term healthier, of course, not build the road and then keep that forest as intact forest. That's probably it's a worthwhile expenditure, and it's something that we can look at as part of the study. And then we also require that barring any natural disaster, fire, wind especially, site that is left undisturbed for at least 10 years post treatment. So kind of like the picture, you get a few trees blow down here and there. We would ask that they're just left because we want to leave it as natural as we can and see how it develops over time. So, and we're also asking permission, and this will be in the summer. And we're asking permission that we can prepare periodically just for any measurements we have for the future, and like one of the research design for this is that, you know, we may have people come to us in year 3, 4, or 5 that want to research something around wildlife or anything like that too. We're trying to get all our research and have enough data that they can still use our older sites, and then that's one of the other considerations of that we may call, you know, year 5 or we find some funding to keep this going. We might be year 6 or later and asking them, hey, you know, we've got this group, we want to look at just anything and like well, no, we would never show up just unannounced and just go run around your club. We'll always let you know, but it is one of the requirements to be involved in the project. And finally, how can you participate? So I wasn't sure if we're going to have the application form, but I think Jackie get one to everyone that wanted it. So I mean that's by far the best way. If you're interested, fill out the business form. Also, I've got my bag is at the back table there, and I got a box of business cards too. So if you got questions or just want to reach out to me directly, grab a business card and my phone number, email, or anything's on there. I'm always up trees, so just reach out. That's at the end of that. So if any questions.